Good afternoon to all, and very welcome to our second day in this webinar, Back in Business, SME Support Ecosystems for Cultural and Creative Sectors. We've been working hard for the past day and a half, and we looked into, we had a spotlight session on book publishing, and then we looked into how innovation flows within the cultural and creative sectors and between cultural and creative sectors and other sectors yesterday. And today we had in the morning a fantastic discussion on what are the digital solutions and opportunities for cultural and creative sectors as well. Now we have a session on access to finance. And of course, we've heard over the past 2 days, and we know obviously that money is very important. We heard in the book publishing sector that it's quite important for policymakers to understand when they are thinking about how to invest in the sectors, to understand how money flows across the cultural and creative ecosystem, obviously. And when we were speaking about innovation, and when I asked speakers, so what are your top 2-3 priorities for policymakers to make all this innovation crossovers happen, Pierluigi Sacco said finance, finance, and finance, obviously. And we know that, of course, there are traditional difficulties that are related to, for example, lending institutions not knowing how to evaluate intangible assets that are so important for cultural and creative sectors. And sometimes also the skills, the financial literacy, maybe even in the financial sectors is not, in the creative sectors is not so high. So there is also that issue. Or maybe lending institutions are not so much even aware about the potential of creative firms. And this is one of the barriers for them to invest in these businesses. But maybe before we dive a little bit deep into this different issues, I would like first, of course, to introduce our speakers, and you'll see them live in a second. We have an incredible panel with us here, and I'm particularly happy to introduce Rita De Grave, our host, in fact, for this webinar in Flanders. Rita is a senior policy advisor in the Department of Culture, Youth, Media in Flanders in Belgium. We also have with us Isabelle de Boldere. Isabelle, you'll correct my pronunciation in a minute. And Isabelle is here also to speak about the Creative Flip project. It's a massive project that's been going on for some time now, but it also has quite some time ahead of it. So it will be good to hear an update on the Creative Flip project as well. Also, Rasmus Winstead joins us. Rasmus is the CEO of the Creative Business Network. And I'm also very happy to say that we are not only European for this session. We also have a great speaker, Professor Doug Noonan, who is joining us from the Indiana University in the States. And it will be great to hear your perspective, Professor Noonan, on not so much maybe banking, what banks can do, but how creatives are using the crowdfunding in general, but also over the past year. And of course, it's a webinar that is jointly organized by the OECD and the Commission, and we are very happy to have with us Maciej Simanovic, Policy Officer, Creative Europe Media Unit. And we will once again go to Flanders, and we'll learn from Flanders from a presentation that will be done by Piet Callens and Martin Quakenberg. And you'll correct my pronunciation in a moment. So thank you to our speakers for joining us today. And maybe I wanted to kick off the discussion with a bit of stock taking. So maybe let's see what was the progress made over the past few years, maybe a decade, and what kind of lessons we can learn from has the understanding of, for example, lending institutions evolved, of policymakers evolved in terms of supporting creative firms and providing them access to finance. And maybe with this first question, I can turn to Rita. Rita, you were underlining this, that quite a lot of progress was made, in fact. So maybe what are your thoughts on this? Rita?
All right, now I think you hear me. I forgot to unmute myself. Okay. What I was saying is, when I look back at the past 10 years, really a lot happened. It all started 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, with the Green Paper, unlocking the potential of the cultural and creative sectors. And in Flanders, this was really the start of discussions and a lot of possibilities. And when we see now how we have evolved, it is really amazing. But I still see, after 10 years, a big opposition between what is commercial and what is mainly not-for-profit. So 10 years ago, we had that discussion, and we still have the same discussion going on. That is not a very positive thing, because we should be able to evolve, let's say, in the direction of creative economy, yet we are still talking about the cultural part and about the creative part. And what I also see is that there is an ongoing claiming by either the Minister of Culture or the Minister of Economy or the Minister of Media, and there is never a good collaboration. And even nowadays, I see that a lot of problems still occur. For example, in the instruments and measures from the field of economy, you see this tendency to look for solutions to exclude a part of the sector. For example, this can be done by saying, for example, non-commercial legal bodies are excluded, or NACE codes are used to exclude certain part of the sector. For example, in Flanders, when you are an applied artist, you can use the instruments for enterprise, but when you are a visual artist, you cannot, even though you have a commercial legal body and a studio and a lot of people working. So there are still problems, but there is a huge professionalization I see the past 10 years. And what Barbara Stacher yesterday said is very true. She said, we developed some OMC papers with recommendations for all participants, for the policy levels, for the institutions, etc. And a lot of these recommendations have been put into action. So I'm very positive to see what has happened, but I'm also very curious to see what we can do better.
Yes, indeed, Rita, quite impressive progress was made. But a lot of challenges remain, as you
yes, absolutely.
And of course, it was great to hear. Well, we knew we heard the news already about the new kick for culture and creative sectors, and not only it's quite an investment, but also it might be a systematic change, in fact, because it's also providing funding for with a long-term vision as well. But maybe I can now turn to Rasmus. So, what's your take on this, on the progress that was made over the past years? Oh, you need to unmute yourself, I guess.
There we go. Sorry, a classic. I think that's the word that's been said the most this past year. You need to unmute yourself. Yes, I had the pleasure of being the co-chair of the OMC group, so the open method of coordination between the EU member states on access to finance. And here I had the great pleasure of connecting with Rita and learning about all the great stuff that goes on in Flanders. So good to see you again, Rita. And my take on this is partially that we are still working in some boxes. You know, we are talking about the non-profits. I would actually prefer to call them the non-market value generators. We have typically looked at the creative industries for all the market values, you know, exports and job creation and innovation and turnover, etc. But there are also a lot of non-market values, such as you know, integration, meaning, understanding, all the stuff that we suddenly call it the cultural sector. And often those have been historically been kept apart, but it doesn't really make sense, I don't think, because if they have great non-market value, they often will also have great market value. You know, if it really is something that has an impact on populations and can go travel across borders, then it usually will also have a great market value. Of course, there are some creative expressions, so to speak, that will always require public support. We will not be able to have a Danish movie market or movies in Danish unless it's heavily supported, because there are simply not enough Danes that can buy enough movie tickets at an affordable price for us to produce any movies in Danish. So of course that doesn't have really a market value as such. But of course, the whole media sector and the whole what all the competences that are needed, and we have a public sector, public service broadcaster, all that is part of an ecosystem that will actually make sure that we have an audiovisual market revenue in Denmark. So it actually is tying together the non-market values and the market values. I think we're still putting that in silos. I also think that we have a challenge with the fact that maybe we shouldn't say so much the culture and creative industries or the creative industries, because investors, they don't really realize what they're, I mean, they know that they're investing maybe in fashion or in gaming or in publishing or in some of the others more, you know, recognized subsectors, you would say, of the creative industries, but they will rarely admit to be investing in the creative industries. I know, at least I know several VCs that would almost find it as something, a bad label to have on themselves than to admit into that. So I think we've spent a lot of time educating the creatives to become better at pitching their ideas and look at you know, how can they better present their the return on investment, etc., for if they get some more finance. But I really also think we need to educate the financing sector, from business angels up to VCs, because there are really some good returns to be made. If you had invested in Cirque du Soleil, if you had invested in, say, Pandora before it became, because these are, you know, creative crafts. And it's true that there are lots of ceramists and jewelers that do not make any money, but some of them actually do and make a lot of money. So I think this labeling is actually not so conducive.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rasmus. You underlined the challenges, but you also provided the answers. And I liked very much when you were focusing on the non-market values, of course. And yesterday we also, of course, heard that to support innovation and the innovation support schemes, they usually cater for technological innovation, obviously, but there is room also, and many countries are doing this, including social innovation in these kind of schemes and supports.
Yeah. I think there's a reason why the UN has announced 2021 to be the creative economy for sustainable development. That's not because they want to support the creative industries, but that's because they see the creative industries as the main factor for a more sustainable world. It's actually what the creative industries can do for the SDGs and sustainable world. But then, of course, if that has to happen, we need to have the right framework condition and access to finance for the creatives so they can go out and do good.
Yes, indeed, it's quite an incredible year this year, 2021. I mean, if there was one good thing about the crisis and this dramatic impact of the crisis on creative sectors is this heightened attention with the International Year for the creative economy, with the G20 focusing for the first time also on culture, with a lot of European support packages at European level, but also at national level. So it's it's a lot of many things will change this year.
I think so too.
I guess. And yeah, it's also was great, well, to hear that the points that you made, that some of the answers are related to building the skills within the sector, but of course, obviously, increasing the awareness of the financial sector as well on the returns of investments in creative firms, even if they don't know this specific job culture in creative firms, etc. Maybe I can now turn to Professor Noonan, because for us here in Europe, it will be very interesting to see how things evolved in terms of creative firms access to finance in the States, and what is the disruption that you are seeing of the past year? Maybe if you can share your ideas on this.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very interesting discussion, and it's nice to follow on Rasmus, because I'm glad he brought up the distinction between the non-market and the market values on this. And I think that's a big part of this. So to answer the question, over the last 10 years, one thing that my research focuses on lately is looking at crowdfunding and these other alternative financing platforms that are out there. And in some ways, I think what we've seen is a huge growth across the world, not just in the United States, but across Europe, and a continuing robust growth in these platforms, in their legitimacy, in their impact, in their penetration into the market, and people using them more and more. They're still a relatively small player, but the growth is strong. And it's something that, because it's digital and online and platform based, it's something that the pandemic did in some ways not disrupt too much. We saw a big drop off in financing through these crowdfunding platforms during the spring and summer of 2020, largely related, I think, to the more macroeconomic shocks, not anything about the platform, but they've returned quite strongly. And one thing we have noticed in the US, at least, is that a feature of a lot of these crowdfunding platforms is that they were, relative to non-arts and culture and non-creative industry types of projects, they were funding predominantly smaller ventures, smaller projects than some of the bigger technology-related projects, for instance. And that disparity, that favoring of smaller enterprises actually faded during the pandemic, during the second half of 2020. So we saw more consolidation and more concentration in crowdfunding of the creative sector sides of things. And we'll see whether that will persist into the future and the creative side will look just like everything else, or if it'll return back to a wonderful platform for supporting the smaller ventures. And then the last comment I'd make on this, in the big picture of the last decade or so, while this has been a big growth, and it's had a big growth in part because it's enabled, one thing we've seen in the cultural sector is a better enabling and support of niche, small market, sort of Danish films, small market types of projects that had a harder time getting off the ground because they lacked the scale 20 years ago in order to finance the project. Now with digitization and these larger online platforms, they're able to get to scale and finance to get off the ground. And I think that's an interesting feature of the last decade or so. And you can see a lot of these online platforms are able to serve very particular small niche tastes that you can get access to that kind of creative content that it was harder to get or impossible to get a generation ago. And that's I think, a refreshing and exciting opportunity in the field. And our ability to continue to finance this and to finance the projects that don't have strong financial returns, but have much stronger social and other returns, and being able to develop financing institutions that can get the gap between the commercial, the Disney, the big simple money projects, and then the ones that have almost no financial returns, but are still worthy endeavors. We have a non-for-profit charitable financing mechanisms in place for a lot of that, but there's a very large gulf in the middle between the commercial and the other. And our financing tools like crowdfunding are coming along to help fund some of this, but we have a long way to go still.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's very interesting. And of course, the landscape in the States and in North America is a bit different from what we have here in Europe, because the philanthropy sector there was traditionally one of the biggest providers of funds for cultural, but also for creative firms, professionals, projects, etc. It's interesting to see what you say, that there is this boom of the crowdfunding funding for creative professionals over the past year, and indeed it's a question whether this will remain and how it will develop further. And it was good to hear this, your reflections on now that we have all these online platforms, that they help also to support and scale up some of the niche projects as well. So that was very interesting. Maybe I can now turn to Maciej from the European Commission. So what are your thoughts on the progress made over the past maybe 10 years, and how things are being disrupted now today over the past year?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think you made quite a good summary when you were introducing the professor who was speaking a minute before. Indeed, a lot have been done. a lot. I think firstly, the notion of culture and creative sectors, it's not only political now, and I think what Rita was saying at the beginning, there is now a clear understanding that this is an important sector, but we also were able to put this question how to deal with the culture and creative sectors from the policy point of view on the economic table. And once we had this definition of culture and creative industries, we were able to start gathering data to understand the size, the employment, the main trends, and then start to discussion, as this session focuses on access to finance, to start the discussion with economic actors. Mainly, well, we started with banks, because before there was very little access to finance for the culture and creative sectors was really limited. From the data we had, it was really marginal. And with all those elements, or legal and economical, we started this discussion. We launched the dedicated financial tools for the culture and creative industries. We started with debt financing, because we are thinking, it's the most easy to use and the volumes could be big. A lot of work from, for instance, Erasmus contributed, and Rita, to establishment of these tools. So from 2016 in Europe, we are working with a number of banks, developing the culture and creative sectors guarantee facility. It was not easy at the beginning. There was a lot of hesitance from the financial actors to enter into this world. But we are thinking that there is an added value, there is an economic value. So this financial tool was actually coupled with the kind of training activities for banks, and we targeted mainly risk departments and marketing departments. And after just 4 years of implementation, we have over 20 agreements with major financial actors, with major financial banks in Europe. We have thousands of loans already guaranteed by the guarantee facility. The volumes are growing very fast. And what is even more interesting, it seems that a lot of them, they are not thinking it's a, it's a public program, okay, it's a kind of an anecdotal thing, but they really implement this notion of support for creativity into their business plans, which is quite well reflected in the feedback we are getting from our partners in the European Investment Fund, who are telling us that they are receiving more and more questions, both from traditional financial institutions, but also from venture capital companies or other equity investors, how they could cooperate more on the investing into culture and creative sectors. And I will have an answer for this later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maciej. Well, what you described, this itinerary is, I guess, sort of a checklist also for countries and regions that want to improve access to finance. So you define your sector, the size of it, and then you build capacity within the lending institutions, and then maybe, well, things will start to pick up. So that's maybe a lesson to learn on how to do it, not just what to do, but how to do it. Maybe we can now speak a bit more and have another round of discussion and ideas, focusing on the maybe cultural sectors, which are often subsidized or the non-for-profit. Maybe we can have your thoughts and examples of policy actions of how to improve access of non-for-profit part of the sector to finance. And maybe public procurement can be an instrument, but maybe is it effective? It's not so effective. Maybe we'll also need to focus a bit more on building the capacity and skills, financial literacy within the sector. So it will be great to hear your ideas on this. Maybe I can turn first to Isabel, if that's all right.
Thank you. Well, maybe building further on what I heard from the other speakers before, I think in the last years, last decade, what has really changed is that the debate on access to finance and how to find solutions has become much more nuanced. Due to increased knowledge indeed and recognition of the different types of values and contributions of culture and cultural and creative sectors in society. As Rita said, indeed, maybe until now, the access to finance for the non-profit sector has been less addressed. Nonetheless, I think, and the crowdfunding example is just one. I think what is very interesting, what also happened on the side of the finance landscape, is that there are, apart from grants and the traditional banks, a lot of other evolutions that are or that can be instrumental for the more non-for-profit activities, and that's microcredit providers, social impact investors, venture philanthropy, crowdfunding. And then what is interesting with the crowdfunding is that you have the more donation-based, reward-based crowdfunding versus really the more equity crowdfunding and lending, which is in terms of logic more similar to what banks expect from investments, more or less. So you have a wide variety of instruments, and that also for the non-for-profit organizations are very relevant and interesting, because a lot of those more alternative financiers have other purposes than only an economic return. This social return, for instance, is very important, and I think this matching between these type of investors and the cultural and creative sectors, I think there's still a lot of opportunities. I think also something that we should keep in mind when we, and then I follow Rasmus, that we should be very careful in thinking in boxes, is that this non-for-profit sector, what is it? It is very different, for instance, a state-owned orchestra, which is non-for-profit, and actors or freelancers operating in performing arts organizations, but do have to take care of their own income, and so they're very different also financing challenges for a state-owned non-profit organization versus a very small organization or a grassroots social cultural enterprise looking for finance. So, and in that sense, the richness of the financing landscape in that respect, and that we've also seen in the last years, that a lot of things are happening there, is very important. And there, I think, creating awareness with those type of financiers, venture philanthropists, foundations, and so on the importance and the opportunities of investing in cultural and creative organizations is really something, where there's still a lot of opportunities, and that we should, pay attention to.
Yeah, maybe a bit of a naive or pragmatic question from my side. We all say that there is this need for awareness raising, and you just mentioned this, including the foundations, all the banks, etc. But how you go about this? I mean, what do you? What does it mean concretely? How can it be done?
Well, that's of course multi-level. So it's creating awareness on the side of all these different financiers, and I think their policymakers can play an important role by being a connector, by creating the right regulatory framework for it, by maybe also thinking about schemes to kind of lower the risks, or so there are a lot of roles that policymakers can play in that respect. And then I think the matchmaking and bringing those different actors together and thinking about solutions together and not each in their own silo. Is that easy? No. I think the case that we will hear from Cultuurloket and Hefboom is a nice one, where both capacity building and a financier collaborate to develop activities that really support the sector. And I think that's a challenge, but the way we need to go is to look for solutions in a more cooperative way, and linking much better this capacity building with financial instruments, with policy, that they strengthen one another. Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, thank you. And of course, this also links to what Maciej was saying earlier. When we speak about awareness raising, it's good also to keep showing the size of the sector in terms of jobs and revenues, etc. I guess maybe on the same question, so what are the good examples of policy actions, or what do we need to do to improve the access of non-for-profit parts of the sector to finance? It will be great to hear Maciej's perspective, and then maybe Rita's, and then to conclude, it will be great to also hear from Professor Noonan. How do you see all this discussion, and I mean, is it similar to what you have in the US, or maybe it's a bit different? So Maciej, please.
Maybe very quickly on this, thank you. Just to remind you that the European Union definition of small and medium-sized enterprise does not really make a difference between profit making and not profit making entity. So that's why, for instance, under the current guarantee facility, non-profit making organizations could be also eligible and could receive a loan from a bank. But of course, we understand that for a number of subsectors, this is not really an option, and you really need to have, I don't know, a patient investor who gives you a bit more time to before you could produce returns, or just would like to invest in a kind of philanthropic organization. That's why we are now at the European Union level, we are reconsidering our definition of social impact investment. And if you look at the European Agenda for Culture, you will see that there's a new element added to this, which is a participation, actually. So the social investments should encourage civic participation in the society. To our mind, this links to democracy, pluralism, to rich media ecosystem. And we would like all this thinking into the current discussions, what we understand by social impact investment. And this will, of course, should lead to some technical developments, which links to investment as well. That's why this is the Commission will to indeed involve much more closer, for instance, philanthropic organizations now, to work with them on solutions for this type of patient capital investment. So this is just one of few elements. We are still at the process of considering, what concrete tools we could use. But actually, especially this work with philanthropic organizations and with microfinance organizations, these are the two main paths we are following. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, well, social impact investment is a big field, and here I see Rasmus wants to maybe chip in.
Yeah, well, also because in the Q&A, there's someone saying that one of the participants that we should have the investors understand the non-market values of the culture and creative industries, and I'm not sure of that. I think it will be very difficult, and that's actually for someone else. The non-market values should be something that the citizens, politicians, society will recognize and support, whereas investors are looking for a return on investment, and we should be happy that they do that, because then it will ensure that we have a pension fund, or that there will be some money for us when we retire. Of course, investors recognize that they're happy that we have good schools and roads and hospitals, so we have a workforce that makes business thrive. I think that's quite obvious, but to ask investors to have different objectives, I think there could be something, and that's something we're working very much on here at CBN, at Creative Business Network, is that we have traditionally said that investing in female founders is the right thing to do. Like it's a good thing to do, but in reality, it's the smart thing to do. It's the bright and the thing to do. If you invest in female founders, you will get a greater return on investment, all things equal. So I think we need to maybe also be careful that we're not pushing something into the right box where it shouldn't be, and simply try to recognize that some of these things are the best thing to do, the smartest thing to do if you want a return on investment. When we look at, for example, female founders within the creative sectors or without the creative sectors. And then I just wanted to, Professor Noonan, there's something that characterizes the creative industries, which is the double unknown. The fact that Steven Spielberg doesn't know exactly how his movie will feel and look like. He can't predict completely because it's usually a team effort. And on the other hand, he can never know how the market, how the consumers will consume it or like it. That's very different from milk and cheese, for example, if you are red wine, if you're producing that. So maybe, is that why crowdfunding is particularly relevant to the creative industries? Because they actually try to gauge the crowd, the consumers, the one part of the double unknown. I think that's we have to recognize also that the culture and creative industries, it's really difficult to predict the outcome, the output. And that's why consumption, of course, is also really, really difficult to predict. But maybe crowdfunding is a solution to that.
Yes, that's a good couple of questions for Professor Noonan. But maybe before we go into this, Rita, you also wanted to say a few things on well, how to improve access of non-for-profits part of the sector. I keep using this term, but just to be clear about what we are saying.
Yes, well, I do believe in the power of microcredits, and that is what Isabel already mentioned. And for Flanders, this was really the key to success, and this in combination with capacity building. And Maarten and Piet will later on explain how they do that in daily life. And for me, this is really a success story, because we had other experiences in the past. In the past, before we worked with microcredits, we worked with an institutional investor specialized in the Flemish economy. And normally they work with traditional businesses, let's say SMEs or bigger organizations. And we asked them to invest in the cultural side of the CCS. And this was not a success because they kept on pursuing what they always did. And it had to do something with financial literacy. So, dear Erasmus, I don't agree that they should not do something about their financial literacy. So they have this dominant thinking pattern of what finance is, and it is always about businesses. But when they come into let's say ecosystems where there is market value, but not like the traditional one and not the traditional assets, then we get into trouble. And then after a collaboration of 10 years, we came to the conclusion that they invested mainly in that part of the CCS that would have gotten investors anyway. So that was the point we decided we have to do something, because there is market failure in the cultural field. And what was very interesting was that we used the technique of public procurement to look for an investor with the experience in this not-for-profit area. And we started with a big market consultation, but we came to the conclusion that the traditional banks were not interested at all.
Wouldn't you rather say there is a non-market failure? there's a failure in the non-market, in the sense that if there are certain areas of the culture and creative sector.
But Rasmus, I suggested I first explain to which conclusion we came. So we did a big market consultation. Good. We did a big market consultation, and no bank was interested, even though we didn't even formulate a maximum fee. They said, no, that is too much work, and there is no money to gain in that sector. Luckily, there was one investor specialized in the social economy, and Piet represents this investor, and they were willing to work in that area. And of course, the social economy has a lot of common characteristics with the not-for-profit part of the CCS. And now we can say that it is really, really a success, that a lot of projects get the loans they need to do the thing they were meant for. And you see that the impact is much bigger than that very big institutional public investors. So for me, this is absolutely a good example. And what Maarten and Piet will explain later on will prove that there was market failure, and that sometimes you can see it with your own eyes. So that was really a very interesting evolution. But Rasmus, please tell me what you were.
No, I mean, I think that's actually what I meant, that there must be a non-market failure in case, if it's the non-profits, the more cultural side, the non-profit side of the CCSs, then it's actually, at the end of the day, a question that the public sector hasn't allocated enough money. If you want more cultural productions that aren't profitable, then there should be allocated more funding for that from the public sector side. But investors look for profits. That's what they want, and we can always try to guide them in sustainability and in female founders and in other kinds of areas where they can take a longer term look at what's good for an industry. But at the end of the day, it's really difficult for someone who's trying to make a good ROI to look into the non-market values. I find the non-market values extremely important, and really also a way for an investor to see if something has market value. But I think it's difficult to get them to change their whole modus operandi. Then it's rather to make them recognize that they should also support with, there's something called EVCA, the European Venture Capital Association, but there's also the EPCA, the Europe Philanthropist Association, where they actually try to put some money in, not necessarily for profit, but that is rare to see that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I saw Mache nodding when I talked about non-market failures. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Katerina, can I?
Yes, please do.
Yes, indeed, we are also cooperating with those different types of equity investors now, trying to, pass the message about the social impact investment. This is the term we are using. And actually, we are also cooperating quite closely with the EIF now on this aspect. I think there is this notion, that something has to change with the investment a little bit in Europe. And I've got the feeling that financial institutions are listening. We don't know what will be the outcome, but as you are presenting this, investment into female venture capital companies, etc., there is something going on now with our understanding what is culture and creative sector needs for investment. And here the patient capital will be, of course, the most obvious answer, plus microfinancing.
Okay, thank you. And I tend to agree with both, a little bit with Rasmus and Rita. But Isabel, you wanted also to react.
Yeah, well, I kind of also want to make the link with the capacity building question. And I tend to agree with Rasmus that we cannot expect from a bank that they change their logic and their investment logic. They have their business model, they have their targets, the risk management rules, and so on. What I think is very important is to also on the side of the culture and creative actors in terms of capacity building, is to create awareness about the thinking processes and the investment logic of different types of financiers. And when you make an argumentation why you want public funding, you use a very different language than make an argumentation in a crowdfunding campaign to convince crowdfunders to invest in your project and why it is important. And it is still a very different story to convince a banker, traditional banker, to give you a loan, or to a venture capitalist to convince them that you are worth their investment. And so creating awareness on that and building capacity on that, on bringing your story to the right investors and in the right manner, is something that where we can still do a lot, and where many culture and creative actors are not aware of and do not have that toolbox, to so to speak. So I think it's about there's still a lot of work in bridging those two worlds, and indeed I don't think that it's a matter of expecting the bank to change their kind of logic.
Well, thank you, Isabel. Can I now maybe turn to Professor Noonan? We had this discussion about the European issues. How is this different from your perspective? Similar, maybe, as well?
Oh, no, in some ways it's very different. The financing structure for the creative sector and the cultural sector in the United States is obviously takes a very different model at a big level. The crowdfunding piece is fairly universal, but I think these are all really interesting points that are raised, and it's a very interesting conversation. I think we do have, at a big picture, a challenge here to divert resources through policy into the kinds of forums or institutions that can support the values and the value propositions that the different parts of the sector want to make. So if it's looking at the not-for-profit side and non-market value creation, it's probably best not to be looking at traditional financing that wants a ROI measured in euros. You want to go find different vehicles and different institutions for this. And that's whether it's microcredit financing, different kinds of financial trusts that might support these things and look for non-financial returns and prioritize those. That's where crowdfunding, as an example, comes in. Most of this stuff in the creative sector is in the donation or reward-based models. They're not equity-based. They're looking at essentially people supporting the social and public interest of it more than their personal, private financial gains. And it works to that extent. We just need to make sure we're putting enough resources into the vehicles that work the best. To the question about the sort of double unknown, I think that really does matter. And I think it speaks to a bigger issue in financing this, and it comes to the risk side of things. And it's not just the risk on the investor side of things, it's also the risk that the producer, the creator has. Not knowing whether it's going to work, not knowing whether they'll get financed. They're taking risks all the time. The arts and creative sector is an act of taking risks fundamentally in many cases. And the double-sided piece of that risk is huge. And that's crowdfunding in part is an extension of the old artistic practice of working with your audience, getting to know them, getting the feedback, adjusting as you go. And it gets a better connection in some ways. And it sidesteps what is a big factor, I think, through a lot of this sector in economic terms about a superstar economy. Much of this sector is characterized by a few big players gobbling up all of the resources, or a very disproportionate share of the resources. And the role of gatekeepers are huge, whether it's an online platform choosing what things get listed, or it's a government agency choosing which things get funded, or a financial institution. And the selection issue is a huge deal here. And that's where crowdfunding is a different mechanism to sidestep some of these gatekeepers, where traditional venture capital had been sort of a bottleneck or blocking people from accessing finance. And I think we want to look to and question some of these gatekeepers and about whether they're making the selections we want. And my last point on that is that in some ways it's not as much about financial literacy and awareness as it's awareness about the networks and who to access and how to access to get past these. And while I think we, in the US, just to give an example, I think we run into a similar situation that looking to the public sector and politicians in the political realm to allocate resources, we run into just as much of a problem at needing financial, economic, market-based ROI. They want to know how many jobs a theater company is going to create. They don't want to know about what kind of meaning and enlightenment and that the theater company will bring. And they're maybe just as bad, if not worse, than some of the financial sectors. So I'm a little pessimistic about that, but I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you very much. I will be also quite curious to know here in Europe, well, it's not a very widespread practice, of course, but in a few regions it's happening when banks are accepting the funds collected through crowdfunding as a collateral for big loan. So I don't know if that's something that also happens in the US.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, arguably one of the most important roles of crowdfunding, it's still small euro quantities there, but it's market R&D. If you can go out into the community and raise enough money in 30 days, you can go back to the banks and go back to other funders and traditional funders and say, look, I have a proof of concept. There's a market demand for it. It's a very compelling bit of evidence. And so using it as market R&D is probably its most important role. It's very effective that way.
Thank you. Rita, what do you think? I think maybe it's the right time now to really learn a little bit more from Hefboom and Kulturløkket, unless you want to provide a bit of an introduction to what this project is, or we leave it fully to Martin and Pete. We don't hear you.
Yes, Erasmus is right. The most used term is unmute yourself. Well, I don't think there's an introduction needed. Perhaps I can say that the fact that we are now working with microcredits is a result of a long process, and later this afternoon I will tell about more about the development of a long-term strategy. But I can say that Isabel de Volderen also played a very important part in that strategy, because she was one of the researchers in this project. But result is two organizations working very closely together, and the collaboration is really the key to success, because it is all about capacity building and not only about lending money.
Thank you. So yes, let's now listen to the presentation, to this case study. Martin, Pete, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you. First of all, let me say it's a very, very interesting debate. Sometimes it was hard for me not to intervene. So I'm really glad that we have the possibility and the time to present what we are doing here. I think Martin and I also have some interesting ideas about what you were discussed about, but let us first focus on this cultural credit we launched. Maybe the next slide. Yeah, okay, thank you. So my name is Pete. I'm the head of the finance department of Hefboom. Hefboom is a cooperative for social and sustainable entrepreneurship. We have 1,300 private shareholders. We are there for 35 years already, and our activities, our main activity is the last one. It's impact financing, so we're doing it already 35 years. And later on, there were other activities that joined this finance activity. We also do some business consulting specialized in social and sustainable economy. And we also have some services to bigger corporations or cooperative legal forms, and where we provide shareholders management. And we also do some re-granting projects. So, but the main activity is the impact / target group financing we are doing already a very long time. So in the beginning, it was only for the social and sustainable economy. Later on, we also provided microcredits. We are still doing that to the all economy, so not specialized in one sector only. And since 2018, we have a credit especially for the cultural industry, and we also grant art loans to individuals. So cultuurkrediet, as we call it in Dutch, it's a loan for professionals active in the cultural sector. It's very important not to intervene in the market or in the regular financial market. It's very important if you come to Hefboom for such a credit that you are excluded by the banks. So we will not give any distortion within the banking sector. We fund enterprises, of course, but also individual artists. So also natural persons, not only legal persons, can get such a loan. The maximum amount is 100,000 euro. I know the microcredit is normally 25,000 euro, but we go up to 100,000 euro, and the interest rate depends on whether are you a self-employed individual rather than being an enterprise. So between 0 to 3% interest rate. Important to know that it's a subordinated loan, which means that you have a kind of leverage to other financing solution, and very important, the applicant doesn't have to give any guarantee. So that's organized in another way, but I will come to that later on. In 2000, so we started with this credit in 2018. In 2020, there was a very need of an adapted way of debt financing. We call it herstelcultuurkrediet. It's kind of a recovery loan. I don't know how you can translate it in the best way, but it was an answer to the COVID-19 crisis. It's quite the same as the regular credit, but you can only apply for it temporary. It was till the end of 2020. Now we are looking together with RIDA and the Flemish government, in which we can continue to give it in 2021 also. And that was very important. The interest rate was or is 0%. Such financial solution, you cannot do it on your own. So that's also my opinion. I heard several times talking about financial institutions going for return or financial return on investment. My belief is that you will never convince them to invest in the culture and creative sectors on their own. You will always need some kind of collaboration. We have it in Flanders. I think the biggest partner in the cultuurkrediet work is the Flemish government, the Department of Culture of RITA. So what they do, they fund Hefboom on 3 levels. First of all, we get operational funding, so to pay the work, the operations. Two-thirds of every credit we give is also funded by the Flemish government, and there's also a guarantee fund. So that's how Hefboom is able to give those credits. So we are the financing partner, and we also provide 1/3 of the funding of every credit. And then you have the other part, and that's Martin, and he will explain the role of Cultuurloket. Martin?
Yes. Next slide, please. Indeed, it's the role of Cultuurloket in general is, so we are funded by the Flemish government, and we have a mission to stimulate and support sustainable entrepreneurship in the Flemish cultural sector. We do this by focusing on the professionalization of that sector, A lot of the things have been mentioned before: the capacity building, working on the financial literacy, getting them, giving them legal advice, and to guide them to additional funding. Right? We speak about additional funding and not alternative financing, as we see it really as a connection between the traditional public funding and all the possible instruments for additional financing. We do this by providing free and first-line business and legal advice, and we're also open for individuals and enterprises in the cultural sector. So we have a very broad group of people that can come to us and that we can advise. This also means that this capacity building or this advice is given through different ways. We have a large knowledge bank on our website, cultuurloket.be, on entrepreneurial teams, on financing, on how to organize yourself as a natural person, as a legal person to work in the cultural sector. We have vocational training programs, and a large amount of our time is going really to personal advice. Clients can come to us, make an appointment, and get personal advice from a legal consultant, a business consultant, by phone or video chat on appointment. Also important, especially in how we work with Hefboom and for the Cultuurkrediet, is process counseling. We see that this ad hoc questions, which are asked by phone or by video chat, that it's important to really go in some kind of traject and give personal coaching to those individuals and organizations about how to build their business model, on how to define it or refine it, and how to structure themselves. Next slide, please. So in general, what's the impact of Cultuurloket, or what are the numbers? The website and knowledge bank, we have a yearly amount of visitors of 250,000 people. We give 75 trainings a year, and last year we had 5,700 attendants for those trainings in total. And the consultancy, it's 5,900 telephone consultancies and 816 one-to-one consultancies. And then you have the process counselings, which are a combination of our normal work and a special mission we had through COVID to help organizations rethinking their model, giving them legal advice during the COVID period. We did 124 of that kind of counselings. We do this with a team of 13 people and also a lot of freelancers. Around 35 freelancers are involved quite directly in our daily work, and we have an expert network of around 45 people. Next slide, please. And this is about the partnership between Cultuurloket and Hefboom. I will let Piet first tell about the Hefboom part.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Rita also already referred to a former investment fund for the cultural and creative sectors, where there was what wasn't a big success. One of the problems there was that the people who were investigating the application for a credit were also guiding, giving consultancy, were helping to form the business plan of those clients or the applicants. So we really learned that that is not a good idea. So you need a kind of Chinese wall, and this is the blue line here you see on the presentation. We think it's very important that there is this Chinese wall. So being within the partnership, the role of Hefboom, first of all, let me say that we do no artistic evaluation at all. For example, within the credit committee, who approves the loan, sometimes it tends to evolve towards an appreciation of the artistic value of what the applicant is doing, and then we have to say, okay, we cannot discuss about that. That's not our role. So what we do, we guide the loan process from the application. We do analyze, of course, the application. We organize the approval. We do the contracting, and we do the credit follow up. So the part where there is the repayment, but also if there are any problems in repaying the loan, we try to keep it as long as possible in-house, meaning we don't try not to use external, I don't know how do you say it in English, but incasso organizations, because this is quite aggressive, or this can be quite aggressive. So that's our part of the process.
Yes, indeed, a Chinese wall in between us, but we have, of course, common goals. Cultuurkrediet is a brand that is owned by Cultuurloket, but we do the marketing and communication together with Hefboom and with the Flemish government. So Cultuurloket really focuses in its personal advice on developing and fine-tuning the business model, learning the sector, what is good, that it is good to have a cash planning, that it is needed to apply for this kind of credit and microfinancing. Very important for us, this is a tool in the financing mix. It's a way to bring ideas into reality and to get them financed. And that's what we really learn to the individuals and the organizations that come to us, that this is one of the possibilities that we can advise, and that's a very important thing. We work on the sustainability of the organization, so it's all about a long-term career and a healthy organization in the long term. Cultuurloket takes also a quite important role in filtering the requests. A lot of people are informed about the possibility, but this does not necessarily have to lead to actual applications for the culture credit. So often we work on cases that do not lead to an actual application. So this means less work for Hefboom, but there's a good thing about it, and I will tell about that later. But when we talk about the key indicators or the key successes, also very important for me, no influence of Cultuurloket at all on the decision of Hefboom. That's where really the Chinese wall is built. Next slide, please.
Okay, let's go to the results. So we started with this debt financing by the end of 2018. Flanders is not that big, so I don't think I will impress with the figures or the euros or the amounts of credits we already gave, but within if we look to the former cultural investing fund, there is a big, it's a lot better than what we had before. So to give you an idea, these are some figures. It's the regular Cultuurkrediet together with the COVID version of it. So we had 126 applications till now. Important to say is, as Martin mentioned before, Cultuurloket is also promoting this loan to the public, besides every other financial instrument for the cultural and creative sectors. But to give you an idea, that's a very important role they are playing, because almost half of the loan applications we get come through Cultuurloket. From the 126 applications we got, 76 were approved, and it's for an amount of 3.4 million euros in total. Also very important, then we are talking about the importance or the quality of the guiding and the consultancy they get from Cultuurloket. 1/3 of the granted or the approved loans were guided by Cultuurloket. For me, it's hard to say that it means that 1/3 of the loans are given thanks to Cultuurloket, because we cannot prove that. But on the other hand, we do believe that a big part of these 30% of loans, 33% of loans would never have gotten a loan if they were not guided by Cultuurloket. That's something we are sure of, even if we cannot prove it. So as you can see, it's a big part of our loans we are giving to the cultural sector are guided by Cultuurloket, and also the importance of that is proved by this results. The general acceptance rate of an application and a loan is 60%. Thank you.
Yeah. And we try to wrap up with some key success indicators of our partnership. The Chinese wall, as mentioned, no interference of Cultuurloket in the decision process, but also no trap for a conflict of interest by Hefboom. Right? There's a possibility to discuss and to advise different financing tools. Cultuurloket is a neutral partner in that, so the client gets what's the best fit for his practice. Also important, it's two experts in their own domain. Talking about Cultuurloket, it's cultural entrepreneurship. So we're an expert on how our clients can be entrepreneurial, and we know the cultural sector and how to do it in that cultural sector. While Hefboom got its experience in its 35-year-long career, and that's of course very important, and it means that the knowledge sharing between the two organizations is also very important for how this product can develop and how financing can develop for the cultural sector, and of course how an organization as Cultuurloket can share this information with the cultural sector as a whole. An important part of the success is the low threshold. It brings access to finance for a really large group of cultural actors. I think it's also important that we have the loans for the natural persons, so that we can really start at the level where an artist or a cultural worker starts its career and needs access to finance. No guarantees are asked, low interest rate, even no interest during the COVID period. The importance of free consultancy and the fact that it's really a product made for the cultural sector. So this is an example of additional financing without market distortion. Cultuurkrediet shows up when banks do not want to finance or do not want to finance the complete amount. And of course, it's a good example of public and private collaboration, the public funding and the private shareholders of Hefboom. And last but not least, we strongly believe that the way that Cultuurloket and Hefboom can work together is also because we are funded by the same public partner, by the Flemish government, by the Department of Culture. So that makes it easier to reach our common goal, and that's building a really good tool and providing a really good tool for the sector in access to finance. Next slide, please. So we think that Cultuurkrediet is a very important tool for the mind shift in the financing of the cultural sector as a whole, cultural workers and enterprises especially. It's leverage. It's the Dutch translation of Hefboom is leverage, but it's very important. Cultuurkrediet has given Cultuurloket the possibility to talk about different financing instruments, and it really improves the financing mix of individuals and cultural organizations. It's key that no artistic evaluation is asked, not by the financing partner, and also it's also something Cultuurloket really doesn't focus on. We focus on how sustainable is the idea, what's the repayment, what's the possibility to pay the loan, what's the health of the business model or a hybrid business model itself. So it really challenges cultural actors to think about their business model, because applying for a cultural credit, thinking about applying for a cultural credit means that you get assessed by an expert on the business model, by repayment, on the repayment capacity and the amount of risk you are willing to take. And if we have learned something in the last 2 days, for the cultural sector, for every sector, taking the risk, I've heard words about being brave and bold, will be very important. And I think these kind of tools are very good to be back in business. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very insightful presentation. I was, well, it also sets the ground a little bit for our final discussion on, well, how to address the policy bottlenecks and what would be the top 2 or 3 priorities for local authorities to do now in the current context as well. But before we go into this round of discussions, I wanted to ask to both of you a question. How do you see things have evolved over the past year, and are you thinking to somehow reshape this cooperation, or maybe some of your approaches now in the next, well, in this year, in 2021?
Maarten?
Yeah, I think Piet is the best one to answer.
Okay, I will answer that. No, I think first of all, we started, we are now working together, I think almost 2 years, yeah. So till now we are quite pleased about the things are going. That doesn't mean that there are some things we can do better. And I think last week or even this week, we also discussed about maybe we have to invest more in the post-credit phase. So meaning once you get the credit, it can be interesting to lower the default risk, that there could also be an important role for Cultuurloket. On the other hand, that's the most difficult part, because once an applicant has his loan, it's very hard to convince them to cooperate. If he doesn't or she doesn't has the loan, or not yet has the loan, it's very easy to convince them to take some coaching, etc. So also from the past, we learned that is a very difficult thing to organize, but we are looking into it. So in my point of view, that's something we should also invest in, and that's then the focus is there to lower the default or the risk to default. Maarten, maybe you can add something else.
Yeah, well, one of the things we're thinking about for the future, or that we have been slightly discussing, is as we have a big part in the cultural sector that is funded. It could be a good combination to think about a model where the application for public funding, the direct public funding, and the credit financing is more combined in one process. That could be good for less administration, and in my opinion also because it will challenge cultural organizations even more on what parts of their business model on their long-term planning has the possibility to be financed by credit finance. But that's something for the future, but it's really something I have been thinking about a lot.
Well, thank you so much to both. That's an incredibly interesting case study of 2 organizations working together and recognizing each other's strength and complementing each other. And thank you so much for also outlining how to do it, the success factors for those who want to try to copy, replicate the thing.
Thank you.
Maybe I can now turn to, well, basically all of you, our panel speakers, but also Piet and Maarten. Well, to our panel speakers, maybe if you have any reflections, what have you learned from this case study, and or what would be your suggestions for the top 2 actions that local governments can take this year to address this issue of access to finance? So please, I don't know who would like to, Isabel maybe?
What I take away from the case study, and of course I know it very, very well, is that apart from the 2 actors that we heard, Hefboom and Cultuurloket, is the importance of the 3rd actor, being the Flemish government, and being the connector and initiator of finding a solution with different partners, and by making smart combinations, coming to a more impactful instrument, I would say. And I think that's something that we should see more in the future, hopefully. Maybe a message for local and regional authorities in these times, now in these crisis times, to further support access to finance is to show themselves as public authorities long-term commitment to invest in the sector themselves, because and continuously showing what the importance is of culture and culture and creative sectors in society, because only that way they can also convince other investors to invest in that sector. So I think that's a very important signal that policymakers should give in these crisis times.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Rasmus?
I think one of the few good things that have come out of the pandemic is the fact that we are also now more connected digitally. And we have discovered in the past that we're a global network of organizations that support the creative industries in 85 plus countries. And we discovered that, for example, our partners in Botswana didn't speak with our partners in South Africa. But now we have actually made it very concrete that we're running a series of 85 pitching sessions where they are obliged to invite investors from other countries into these pitching sessions. In other words, our Norwegian partners can be part of the Nigerian pitching sessions, our partners in China can be part of our pitching sessions in the Netherlands. So I think there are still opportunities to, for what you asked us, what can we do right now and today? We can take advantage of the fact that in some cases, the world has become smaller and more connected, and we can actually create this intra-regional connections between the creatives and the investors. Because we also know, that's also an OMC group, by the way, the creatives are more internationally oriented than other parts of the economy. In other words, they have a greater capacity to go abroad. Just look at how far Gangnam Style got without any of us understanding what they were singing about. So I think there's really a possibility here for the local ecosystems to connect with other foreign local ecosystems on a really tangible, concrete matter.
Yes, I think it's a bit of an optimistic bit to this thing indeed. Maciej, what would be your reactions or comments here?
I think there is a common problem in Europe, whether we are discussing now about the local levels or national or supranational levels. Majority of the companies from the culture and creative sectors have one big problem now, which is lack of liquidity, because as everything was closed, they just don't have, turnover and cash flow. So actually any action which could take this problem into the account is the valid action. And this is also a call for local governments to look into this from this perspective. And maybe just from the very bottom up to top down, you know, the European Union adopted the program which is called Next Generation EU, which is just this huge machinery to help European economy to move out of the crisis. This will be implemented via the national rescue plans, which are drafted by the capitals. And I think this could be a call to try to influence the plans being drafted in the capitals to reflect on, well, culture and creative sectors are recognized as one of the 14 ecosystems which are presented as an objective. There's also a very important element of digital transformation, which is embedded into this Next Europe, Next Generation EU program. And the digital element also includes an element of content creation and distribution, which links very closely to the cultural and creative sector. So that would be my call, to use this opportunity to promote at the local level this new investment opportunity.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Luke, Professor Noonan, so what would be your takeaways and maybe also suggestions for actions for local governments in the Americas, in Europe?
So it's all very interesting. And I think the two words that come to mind, one is about diversification. And I think this gets to the digitization, and it talks about finding organizations and enterprises that are able to diversify their revenue streams and look for this as things to invest in. But also, we found that a lot of organizations during 2020 did not have diversified sources of support. And I think they were very much unsustainable and in bigger trouble. And I think continuing to support those that are able and are thinking about this is important. The other piece is, if we think about building this stuff forward, I think we need to spend more time worrying about or thinking about failure. And that's built into part of this system. And we should actually embrace it as something that is not necessarily a bad thing. Some of these risks shouldn't pay off. But I'm not sure that we spend enough time thinking about what our plan for failure is when it does happen. And I think that's generally an overlooked piece, at least on the American side of things. We focus on people who have very good plans for success, but we don't focus on people who have good plans for when it fails. And it will fail in many cases, and we should be supporting those who have sort of good exit strategies as well.
Yes, celebrating failure is one of the things that we need to learn how to do it. And of course, I can refer to yesterday when we had the Flanders strategy to support innovation in creative sectors. And one of the lessons learned from that strategy, and then the way they reshape the strategies, that support for innovative projects should take into account this, should give space for mistakes and for experimentation. Otherwise, if you only fund those who succeed, you are probably not really supporting the experimentation. But it's a difficult question when you are talking about public money, obviously. Maybe Pete, Martin, do you have any final remarks before we close it with Rita?
Martin?
Yes, I think for the local authorities, Rita mentioned a very important thing is that the economic support, and also Maciej was talking about recovery plans. It's very important that the cultural sector can make use of the economic support and the economic tools. So it's good that content creation and distribution is in there. I want to refer to the session of yesterday, or maybe this morning, where there was a long plea for really looking for new artistic content creation. So that might be something that we can go into. And I've heard a good plea on the Department of Experiment and Failure, and that's maybe something that local authorities could enforce, and that organizations could apply. So that's really interesting, and very important with this crisis. We need to have a correct payment of everybody involved in the whole ecosystem. We have a cultural sector. We are professionals in what we do. We are cultural and creative professionals, but everybody should stand up, and also the gatekeepers should really pay attention to a correct payment. That's not an easy one when a sector is hit so severely, but I think it's the most important one to be a decent cultural sector and a leading one in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Maybe if I can still add a small part, it's very good that these initiatives are organized within Europe. Also, we were talking about the European Investment Fund, but there's one thing I would like to call it a bit of a warning, is that the instruments that are developed within Europe, I think there are still some opportunities in taking into account specific regional characteristics. What I mean is we also have a cooperation with EIF for a social guarantee fund, the EASY project. And to be honest, it's a very, very hard collaboration. It's not easy. And that's mostly due to a kind of forced logic we are pushed into that is coming from the European Commission or AEF vision on how things should work. But you should never forget that every region has some specific characteristics that make it very hard to fit in that logic. And that's something I miss often, that is the knowledge of how things are working on a regional level. And that's a pity because the initiatives coming from Europe are always very good, there is a lot of money, there are a lot of possibilities. This should and this could work, but this is for me a kind of point to take more care of. That's something I want to give also as a reaction.
Thank you very much. And for us, we've been working on the local employment and economic development issues for the last 40 years. And we see this is not a European problem, it's a general problem indeed. Well, the implementation issue, and all, it's related to all the policy silos discussion, etc. So it's a big issue indeed. I would agree. Rita, you are our host today, so maybe the final word would come from you before we break, before the next session.
Thank you, Katja. Well, what I would like to share is that we can't deny there is something like multiple
Yes, maybe Zoom needs a coffee break. Rita, I'm not sure we can hear you. But maybe, well, we have a bit of a technical issue here, but as Rita is also joining the next session, she might be willing to provide her final words at the start of that session. So maybe with this, I thank you all our speakers. Thank you so much for those who were joining us from different corners of Europe, but also from the United States. And we'll meet in 15 minutes at 2:45 for the concluding sessions on how to bring all this together. So see you in 15 minutes, and thank you so much.